Hey, Megan here. So this is a sort of part 2 or supplemental video to my History of Plants episode talking about the story of the begonia. Scumfrog74 requested I cover begonias, and I figured, well, might as well cover them as thoroughly as possible. So Scumfrog74, thanks for the idea. This is for you. My history with begonias has been interesting. I often describe it as a Cold War. We've reached a sort of tense stalemate where, yes, they're alive, but flourishing, that's a strong word. We're more like in a surviving zone. Case in point. And I know I'm not alone in this. Begonias with their stunning leaves and delicate flowers are undeniably gorgeous, but they can be a bit temperamental. But today, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of keeping these guys happy. So whether you're a seasoned begonia veteran or a newbie trying to avoid my Cold War, we're gonna cover everything you need to know about keeping these beauties alive. We'll cover the incredible diversity of begonias from the velvety rex to the elegant canes and break down their specific care needs, hopefully turning this Cold War into something warmer, like two people trying to co-parent after a particularly messy divorce. You know, where like you're trying to make it work for the kids, or in this case, the leaves. Yeah, that's what I equate this to. Let's make it happen.
Hey, Megan here. Sorry for the quick break. Just wanted to let you know, in case you missed the post, I am taking your questions for an upcoming video about the channel, about plants, whatever you want to talk about. And I didn't mention this before, but there might be prezzies if I pick your question. So if you have a question and you want it answered, I guess leave a plant emoji right before your question so that I know it's for that upcoming video and not for this video. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Back to the video.
What's cool about begonias is that they are a really diverse group of plants, and consequently the categorization can get a little wonky because different people have different opinions on what constitutes a variety or a type. For the sake of brevity, I'm gonna stick to the 3 that I commonly see mentioned as houseplants. If you want me to cover the rest, leave a comment and let me know. So if you're not sure which begonia you have, here is a quick guide. You've got everything from the showy Rex begonias, also known as rhizotomous.
Pedantic note, all Rex begonias are rhizotomous. Not all rhizotomous begonias are Rexes.
With those amazing, almost velvety leaves and wild patterns, to the cane begonias, which are more upright and, well, kind of elegant in like a plant sort of way. Then there are the tuberous begonias, and if you want flowers, those are your plants. They produce large, showy blooms on thick, fleshy stems. It's pretty wild how many different looks you can get with just one plant family. Consequently, each type has their own quirks. So what I'm gonna do is start with general care for those who are in a rush and need to get the begonias happy ASAP. And then I'll break down care for specifics because they're not all the same. So let's start general care. First is lighting. Many begonia species have originated on the forest floor under the tree canopy, so they're not adapted to harsh, direct sunlight. Instead, bright but indirect light is going to be your best bet. And look, I think bright indirect gets thrown around a lot, so to give you a benchmark, think a north-facing window with a sheer curtain. Rex begonias can handle a little more shade than tuberous or canes, but don't push it. Now watering, and this is where it gets tricky. Begonias, they want to have their soil consistently moist, but not soggy. Like, imagine a wrung out sponge, not a swamp. A good rule of thumb is to let the top inch or 2 of soil dry out before you water again. And seriously, drainage holes are non-negotiable. Root rot is a begonia's worst enemy, and it's almost always from overwatering. For soil, you're gonna want something well draining. A standard potting mix with some perlite or orchid bark mixed in is usually perfect. It helps keep things airy and prevents the soil from compacting, which is crucial because then the roots can't access oxygen, or it's difficult for them to stretch out. Average room temperatures are fine, but keep them away from cold drafts. Humidity, however, is where things get interesting. Since begonias are mostly tropical plants, they like it nice and humid. And forget the misting and pebble trays. Those have been largely disproven. If you really want to give your begonias the humidity they crave, a plant cabinet is the way to go. And I have a video that shows how I set up these 3 different cabinets right there. But essentially, a plant cabinet allows you to create a controlled environment with consistent humidity, which begonias absolutely love. And finally, fertilizing. They are not heavy feeders on average, but they do appreciate a little boost during the growing season. A balanced liquid fertilizer diluted to half strength every 2 to 4 weeks in the spring and summer is usually enough. Just skip the fertilizer during the winter when they are resting. I really like Jack's Classic all-purpose fertilizer, but get whatever's available in your area and cheap. One thing before we move on though, it is worth noting that some begonias adapt really well to semi-hydroponics, which is a soil-less growing method. I'll dive deeper into which varieties are best for semi-hydro later in the video, but keep that in mind if you're looking for an alternative to traditional soil growing. Okay, that is the general rundown. Now, let's get into the specifics of each type because they all have their own little quirks. Let's talk Rex begonias, or if you want to get technical, rhizotomous begonias. These guys, they're like the divas of the begonia world. They have stunning leaves and incredible patterns, but they can be a bit picky. Popular varieties include escargot with its spiral leaves and iron cross with its bold markings. So let's break down what they need to keep them happy. First off, light. Like I said before, bright indirect light is the way to go. But Rexes can tolerate a bit more shade than other begonias. Now, that doesn't mean you should stick them in a dark corner. Think more like filtered light or a spot near a north-facing window. If you see their colors start to fade, they're probably not getting enough light, while if they start to get crispy edges, they're probably getting too much. Watering is key because Rexes like their soil to be consistently moist, but again, not soggy. It's a balancing act with it. Let the top inch or so of soil dry out before you water, and make sure you're using a pot with drainage holes. I know I keep saying that, but that's because it's crucial. Overwatering is the quickest way to kill a Rex. Humidity is another big one for Rexes. They love it. A plant cabinet is ideal, but if you don't have one, a humidifier is your next best bet. Or even a semi-transparent or fully transparent box. I get them from Target, the Bright Room brand. Perfect. Rex begonias really suffer in dry air, so humidity is paramount. Soil-wise, well, they need something well-draining. A mix of standard potting soil with perlite or orchid bark is perfect. It keeps the soil airy and prevents waterlogging. When fertilizing, they're not heavy feeders, but a boost during the growing season is always appreciated. Use a diluted, balanced fertilizer every 2 to 4 weeks. That's usually enough. Again, just skip it during winter. Now, a common issue with Rexes is powdery mildew. It looks like white powdery spots on the leaves. Good airflow helps prevent this, so don't cram them too closely together. If you do get it, a fungicide can help, but prevention is always better. They can also be susceptible to mealybugs and spider bites, so keep an eye out for those. For those who are interested in semi-hydroponics, Rex begonias can be adapted, but in my experience, require careful monitoring of water levels to prevent rhizome rot. Their success is dependent on consistent moisture control and proper aeration in the growing medium, which, if you know semi-hydroponics, it's not a huge deal, but they just seem to be more finicky than the other types. So yeah, Rexes can be a bit demanding, but those leaves, I think they're worth it. All right, let's talk cane begonias. These guys are a bit different. They're like the tall, sophisticated member in the begonia family. Popular varieties include angel wing, like my sad one here, with its classic spotted leaves, and Sophie Cecile, known for its prolific blooms. Light is still bright and direct, but cane begonias tend to want a little more light than Rexes. They can handle a little morning sun, but really avoid those harsh afternoon rays. Think of like east or west facing windows. If they're not getting enough light, they'll tell you by getting really leggy because they're trying to stretch towards it. Watering is still a little finicky of an issue. They like their soil to be consistently moist, but not soggy. Let the top inch or two dry out before watering. And you know the drill. Drainage holes are essential. Humidity is still appreciated, but they are a bit more tolerant than Rexes. Plant cabinet is probably still your best bet, but they'll often do okay with average household humidity, especially if you group them together with other plants to create a humid microclimate, but don't group them two together. You still want some airflow. The soil, well, draining is still key. A standard potting mix with perlite or orchid bark is still a good choice. And fertilizing is similar to Rexes. A diluted, balanced liquid fertilizer during the growing season is good, but again, skip it during the winter. Now, cane begonias can get pretty tall, and sometimes you might want to prune them to keep them bushy. Pruning will also encourage branching, which just means more flowers. If you do decide to prune, make sure that your shears are clean and sterile before and after use. That will prevent any potential diseases spreading. And like all begonias, keep an eye out for pests like mealybugs and spider bites. It's also worth noting that many cane begonias, particularly varieties like the angel wing, adapt really well to semi-hydroponics, despite what this one looks like. This one is my fault, not its. If you're looking for a soilless growing method, they are a really good choice. I'll dive into semi-hydroponic growing later in the video, but it's something to consider. All in all, cane begonias may still have their quirks, but in my opinion, overall are way more forgiving than Rexes. All right, let's talk tuberous begonias. These are the ones that really bring the drama. I mean, look at those flowers. They are like the rock stars of the begonia family. Popular varieties include Nonstop and Illumination, both known for their stunning blooms. Tuberous begonias do appreciate consistent moisture while they are actively growing and flowering, so you'll want to aim to keep the soil evenly moist, but the key here is to avoid letting the soil become waterlogged. The tubers are particularly susceptible to rotting if they sit in overly wet conditions, so while you still need to be cautious about overwatering, you might find yourself watering slightly more frequently than you would for Rex or cane begonias during the active growth season, especially if they are in a warm and bright location and are actively blooming. However, the crucial part remains: never let the soil stay consistently wet. The University of Minnesota actually recommends letting the soil become quote unquote slightly dry before watering, but also says tuberous begonias aren't drought tolerant, so it's probably best to stick to watering when the top inch of soil feels dry. But if you have other experiences that you'd recommend, let me know in the comments. Humidity is still appreciated, but they are not as demanding as Rexes. Average household humidity is usually fine, especially if you have good airflow. Like the others, well-draining soil is crucial. A standard mix that has perlite or orchid bark is still good, but make sure it's really well draining. Those tubers are super susceptible to rot if they sit in wet soil. Fertilizing is where tuberous begonias really shine. Since they're such prolific flower producers, they are heavy feeders during the blooming season. So they're going to need a balanced liquid fertilizer diluted to half strength every 2 weeks. But, and this is important, once they start to go dormant in the fall, you really need to stop fertilizing. Speaking of dormancy, this is a big thing with tuberous begonias. Once the weather starts to cool down, they'll start to lose their leaves and go dormant. This is normal, don't freak out. You'll need to reduce your watering and let the tubers rest. You can either leave them in the soil or dig them up and store them in a cool, dark place until spring, particularly if they're outdoors. For those interested in semi-hydroponics, tuberous begonias are not really the best candidates. Their tubers are very susceptible to rot if they sit in water, so I'd recommend most likely sticking to just traditional soil. They are also susceptible to mealybugs and spider bites, so keep an eye out for those. So yep, tuberous begonias require a bit more effort, especially with their dormancy, but those flowers, I think, make them worth the extra care. Let's talk semi-hydroponics for begonias. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about, semi-hydroponics means growing plants in an inert medium like leca with a reserve of nutrient water at the bottom. The plant's roots draw up the water as needed. Speaking as someone with ADHD who can get a bit overzealous and neglectful in cycles, it really helps reduce the risk of overwatering, which is a major concern with begonias, and also provides consistent moisture and nutrient delivery. However, there are some challenges. Begonias, especially Rexes, are prone to rhizome rot if they sit in water for too long, so it's crucial to monitor the water levels and ensure good aeration. All that means, so for these, and I sell these ones on Etsy, you can see that they are semi-opaque, which means that I can pay attention to the water level, but it's not so transparent that algae or biofilm is really an issue. I haven't had a problem with that. Your mileage may vary. I also use pumice instead of leca. It was just cheaper, honestly, and seems to be just fine, despite what this begonia looks like. My other 250 plus plants that are in semi-hydroponics, they seem to do just fine with it.
Why not just use soil? Chunky mediums like pumice, leca, pon, etc. all have gaps when in a pot, which lets oxygen hit the roots and makes it easier for the roots to make room for growth. Soil can compact, squishing out space for oxygen. Also, I'm allergic to a few molds found in soil, so this makes life and breathing easier.
Here are a few quick tips. I recommend using a well-draining container, keeping the water reservoir at the appropriate level, and flushing the medium periodically to prevent salt buildup. Also, people usually recommend getting a nutrient solution that is designed for semi-hydroponics. In my experience, Jack's Classic has been fine. So if you've got like an heirloom cutting or begonia that you want to make sure is going to be fine, then yeah, spend the extra money. But I don't think that it's necessary. Most balanced fertilizers that can be diluted in water do okay. In my experience, semi-hydroponics can be a great option for begonias, especially if you struggle with overwatering. Just remember to do your research and monitor your plants closely. As I mentioned earlier, some begonia varieties really thrive in this soilless growing method. Cane begonias are particularly well suited, and Rex begonias can also be adapted. They're just a little more high maintenance with it. Now let's talk about making more begonias with propagation. I love this because I'm actually pretty good at it, and propagation is a great way to expand your collection for really cheap or share your favorite varieties with friends. The good news is begonias are pretty easy to propagate. There are a few methods depending on the type of begonia you have. Leaf cuttings work well for Rex begonias and some other rhizotomous types. Cane begonias are best propagated by stem cuttings, but can I show you? All right, here it is. This is my moss world. This is my angel wing begonia that started from a leaf. I am really proud of it. And I can't even find the original leaf that it came from. But as you can see, we got a pretty big guy in here, and he should probably come out, but it's that situation where, like, I'm worried that once I tell it that it can come out, I'm going to kill it. And it seems to do okay. In here, it's just a little too tall. So decisions are going to have to be made soon. As far as tuberous begonias, well, they're usually propagated by dividing the tubers. So how does this work? So for leaf cuttings, you want to select a healthy leaf and cut it into sections, making sure each section has a vein. However, if you want to just pop a leaf in as is, go for it. The reason that people will cut them up is because you have a higher chance of making more begonias that way. Then you can either lay the sections on a moist potting mix, or you can even insert them vertically. As you can see, I stick them straight into my moss box, close the lid, and put it under the grow light. End of chores. For stem cuttings, take a cutting that has a few nodes and remove the lower leaves. That way that prevents the leaves from rotting. Then you can dip the cut in rooting hormone if you want, and plant it in a moist potting mix. For tuber divisions, you'll want to wait until the tuber is dormant. Then you can carefully divide it into sections, making sure each section has at least one growth point. Regardless of which method you choose, you're going to want to keep the cuttings and divisions in a warm, humid environment and keep the soil or moss moist, but not soggy. Rooting can take a few weeks or a few months depending on the type of begonia and the growing conditions, but once they're rooted, you can pot them in their own containers whenever you want. All right, now let's talk about common begonia problems and how to fix them. Even with the best care, begonias can sometimes run into a few issues. But don't worry, because most of these are easily fixable. Overwatering is probably the biggest begonia killer. Those delicate roots just can't handle it. The signs are usually yellowing leaves, drooping, and sometimes a funky smell will come from the soil. The solution is to let the soil dry out more between waterings and ensure your pot has good drainage. If things get super serious, you can transfer the begonia to a new pot with fresh soil, but you don't want to mess with transplanting because you might run into transplant shock. This is more for like extreme cases, and you're really worried that rot is going to set in soon or it has begun to happen. And can I divert for a second? Because there's a fun fact for you. Root rot might work differently than what you imagine. For the longest time before I became a horticultural writer, I thought it was just like the water was keeping the roots soaked so they'd get mushy, But the science behind it is actually pretty crazy. When the soil stays consistently waterlogged, it displaces oxygen that the roots need to breathe. Roots breathe, or respire if you want to get fancy, just like we do, and without oxygen, they begin to suffocate and die. These oxygen-deprived conditions create what's called an anaerobic environment, which is the perfect breeding ground for various opportunistic pathogens, including both bacteria and fungi. So, while you might think of root rot as just too much water, it's actually a cascade of events. The lack of oxygen weakens and kills the root cells, making them vulnerable to attack by these microbes. The bacteria and fungi then break down the dead root tissue, leading to that slimy, mushy, and sometimes bad-smelling root system that we recognize as root rot. And once the roots are compromised, they can no longer effectively transport water and nutrients to the rest of the plant, leading to the above-ground symptoms like yellowing and drooping leaves. So, while bacteria and fungi play a role in the decay of root tissue, the real culprit behind the root rot is usually us. End of science tangent. Moving on. Powdery mildew is another common problem for begonias. Powdery mildew is a fungal disease that looks like a white powdery coating on the leaves, stems, and sometimes even the flowers. If left untreated, it can weaken the plant and cause leaves to distort, discolor, and even drop. Good news is that powdery mildew is treatable and, more importantly, preventable. Here's what you need to know. For prevention, good airflow is crucial. Powdery mildew thrives in humid conditions with poor air circulation, so make sure your begonias have plenty of space around them to allow for good airflow, so avoid overcrowding your plants. You can also use a small fan to gently circulate air around them. If you have plant cabinets like I do, those little USB fans that they use for PCs are perfect. Just hang them up on magnetic hooks. Next, avoid getting water on the leaves when you water. Powdery mildew doesn't need free water to develop, but damp leaves can create a more favorable environment for it. So water the soil directly and also ensure your begonias are getting the right amount of light. While they don't like direct sun, they don't thrive in deep shade. Insufficient light can weaken the plant and make it more susceptible to disease. Finally, prune away any dead or dying foliage to improve airflow and remove potential sources of fungal spores. If you spot powdery mildew, you need to act quickly. So here are some effective treatment options. First, carefully remove any leaves, stems, or flowers that show signs of powdery mildew. Dispose of them in the trash and not your compost, because that's just going to be a whole problem. Now, if the infection is mild, simply improving airflow might be enough to stop it from spreading. Several fungicides are effective against powdery mildew, so look for products containing neem oil. This is an organic option and can be very effective, especially if caught early. Potassium bicarbonate, which is another organic option that can actually eliminate powdery mildew. Sulfur-based fungicides, these are usually effective but should be used with caution as they can damage plant tissue if not used properly. There are many chemical fungicides available whose names I have so much trouble pronouncing, so I'll just list them here. If you decide to go this route, always follow the product instructions carefully because you can end up damaging the plant much easier than you think. Finally, some gardeners have success with homemade remedies, although their effectiveness can vary. One option is milk spray. Mix 1 part milk with 2 parts water and spray on the affected leaves. I'm just mentioning it to be complete, but I don't recommend this because I like the thought of having smelly milk on my leaves is not something I want to deal with. Another option that some suggest is mouthwash, a solution based of 1 part ethanol-based mouthwash to 2 to 3 parts water can be sprayed on the leaves. But if you think about it, ethanol is an alcohol, right? So too much of it can maybe dry out those plant cells. Again, I haven't tried these methods, I'm just letting you know. Another option is a vinegar solution, mixing 2 to 3 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar with a gallon of water, spraying that on the leaves. There's also a baking soda mixture that a lot of people use. Combine 3 tablespoons of baking soda, a gallon of water, a couple of drops of dish soap, and a table of cooking oil. The dish soap and the cooking oil essentially help the solution stick to the leaves. Moving away from powdery mildew, pests are another common challenge for begonia owners, and 2 of the most frequent culprits are mealybugs and spider mites. Catching them early is key to preventing significant damage. Mealybugs are relatively easy to spot. They look like tiny, soft body insects covered in like a white, cottony or waxy substance. You'll often find them clustered in the leaf axils where the leaf meets the stem, or along the veins of leaves and on the undersides of leaves. Mealybugs suck sap from the plant, which can lead to yellowing, stunted growth, and distorted leaves. They also just like to add to the screw you. They excrete a sticky substance called honeydew, which can attract sooty mold or ants if you're outdoors. If you catch the mealybugs early, you can often take care of them pretty easily. For small numbers, just use a cotton swab dipped in rubbing alcohol and just dab it directly on mealybugs. It's really satisfying because the alcohol dehydrates them and does the trick. If you have a more widespread issue, insecticidal soap is a great option because it works by suffocating those soft body insects. Make sure you spray all parts of the plant, get those undersides of the leaves and into all those little nooks and crannies, and you'll probably need to do a few applications. Neem oil is another good choice. It's an organic insecticide that messes with the feeding and the molting of many pests, including mealybugs. Just be sure to follow the instructions on the bottle for how to mix and apply it. If you're unlucky enough to have a really stubborn case, there are systemic insecticides, but use these with caution and be aware of any potential impact on beneficial insects, especially if you have your begonias outside. Now, spider mites are a bit trickier because they are much smaller than mealybugs, so you might not see them with the naked eye at first. Often the first sign is really fine webbing, usually along the undersides of leaves or in between the leaves and stems. The mites themselves look like tiny moving specks or almost like dandruff. They can be red, brown, yellow, or even green. Just like mealybugs, they suck sap, and that causes the really characteristic stippling, which looks like tiny yellow or brown spots on the leaf surface. If you have a heavy infestation, the leaves can turn completely yellow and you might see a lot of leaf drop. In terms of treatment, spider mites like really dry conditions, so one of the first things you can do is try to increase the humidity around your begonia. I would recommend putting it in some sort of quarantine box. I have a whole video that talks about how I created a double-decker quarantine station. Check that out if you want some inspiration. You can also try just gently wiping down the leaves with a damp cloth. That can physically remove a lot of the mites and their eggs. Insecticidal soap is also effective against spider mites, but you'll likely need to do a few applications, usually every 7 to 10 days because this disrupts their life cycle. Neem oil works really well on spider mites. And if you're looking for another natural solution, you can actually introduce beneficial predatory mites that will feed on the spider mites. Another common issue that can affect begonias is leaf spot. Leaf spot is typically caused by either a fungal or bacterial pathogen. This shows up as discolored spots on the leaves that might start out small and then get bigger over time. The spots themselves can be different shapes and sizes, and they can come in different colors too. Sometimes the center of the spots will dry out and feel kind of papery, and if it gets really bad, the leaves might even turn yellow and fall off. And these things really like humid conditions, especially when the air isn't circulating well and if water stays on the leaves for too long. If your plants are too crowded together, or if you tend to water from overhead and get the leaves wet, that can definitely contribute to leaf spot. To treat leaf spot on begonias, the first thing you'll want to do is make sure your begonias have good airflow. Give them some space and maybe even use a small fan to gently circulate the air around them. When you water, try to water right at the base of the plant directly onto the soil so that you keep the leaves as dry as possible. Any leaves that have spots on them should be removed right away, and use clean pruning shears that are sterilized, making sure you throw those leaves in the trash and not your compost. If the problem gets severe, or it seems like it's spreading really quickly, you might need to use a fungicide if it's a fungal issue or a bactericide if it's bacterial. Just make sure you choose the product that's labeled for use on begonias and always follow the instructions on the label. You might sometimes notice, especially with cane begonias, that they start to develop these really long, stretched out stems with not that many leaves on them. This is what we call leggy growth, and it's a pretty clear sign that the plant isn't getting enough light. What's happening here is that the plant is literally stretching to try and find more light so that it can create energy through photosynthesis. When the light isn't strong enough, the stems get really long and the plant might not produce as many leaves, or the leaves it does produce might be smaller and spaced out along the stem. The best thing you can do for a leggy begonia is to move it to a spot with brighter indirect light. An east-facing window is often a great choice. If you don't have enough natural light, you might want to think about using a grow light. You can also prune those leggy stems back because this will actually encourage the plant to start producing new growth from the nodes. Those are like the little points on the stem where leaves come out. And once you prune it, as long as it's happy, you'll notice that your begonia becomes much bushier and more compact in shape. Just make sure that when you're pruning, you use clean shears and don't be afraid to trim them back. You can always try and propagate those stems too. Finally, try rotating your begonia regularly. This helps make sure that all sides of the plant get even light, which can promote more balanced growth. And finally, some begonias just drop their leaves. It can be a little alarming when your begonia starts dropping leaves, but it's often just the plant's way of reacting to some kind of stress in its environment or how it's being cared for. Sorry. There are a few different things that can cause leaf drop in begonias. Sudden changes in temperature, like if you move it near a drafty window in the winter or right by a heating vent. Overwatering, where the soil stays too soggy, that can lead to stressing the roots out and lead to yellowing leaves that eventually drop. There's also underwatering. If you let the soil get too dry, the leaves can wither and fall off. Low humidity is another cause, especially for those begonias that like more moisture in the air. That can cause stress and leaf drop. You'll notice the leaves also have crispy edges. Transplant shock's another issue, which can happen if you repot a begonia as it gets used to its new home. And finally, if you have tuberous begonias, leaf drop in the fall is totally normal as it goes into its natural dormancy period. The best thing you can do is try to keep your begonia in a stable environment Avoid those sudden temperature swings and try to keep it away from drafts. Make sure you're watering it correctly too. For most types, let the top inch or two of soil dry out a bit between waterings, remembering those slight differences for tuberous begonias. If the air is dry, try to increase the humidity. If you just repotted your begonia and it's dropping a few leaves, just give it some time to adjust and make sure you're providing good care. And if it's a tuberous begonia dropping leaves in the fall, just reduce your watering and let it do its thing. Pay attention to the overall health of your plant and try to figure out if there have been any recent changes or if there's a consistent environmental factor that might cause some of those leaves to drop. And that is your comprehensive guide to begonia care. From velvety rexes to showstopping tuberous and the lovely and patient, in my experience, cane begonias, we've covered a lot. Remember, each variety has its own picadillos, but with a little attention to their specific needs, you can keep them thriving. Do me a favor and leave a comment below with your favorite begonia variety, or if you have any questions, I'd love to help you out if I can. And nerdily, I love hearing about your plant journeys. Until next time, greenies, stay curious and don't forget to flourish.